Hello and welcome. I'm Tara Cook with TLC Dyslexia Services. If you're watching this, you may be in a very different places in your journey with dyslexia. Some families are just beginning to ask questions. Others may have been navigating this for quite a while. This short video is meant to give you an overview, not to rush you into any decisions. When I talk with families for the first time, I usually explain dyslexia in a very simple way. I describe it as having two main pillars. Understanding these two pillars often helps parents make sense of what they've been seeing for years. The first pillar is a rote-based memory difference. This is not a global or pervasive memory difference. Dyslexic children will be able to remember stories, things from their childhood, things that have a pattern or a spelling rule or an experience. They can remember parts in a play. They can often memorize their prayers very well. But where the difference lies is something they have to memorize that has no context, no pattern, no rule to it. So things such as days of the week, months of the year can be very hard for dyslexic students to remember and learn. Multiplication and division facts, the ones that do not have a pattern or a trick to them. Remembering a horrible phone number like mine that has no pattern. For some students, this difference is mild, but for others it can feel much more significant, especially in school settings. How does this connect with reading then? One of the reasons that reading can be so challenging for dyslexic students is we are not understanding how much memory is really involved. We're not just memorizing like the shape of a letter. We also have to attach a sound to that symbol. And many letters, especially vowels, can make more than one sound. Some vowels make up to 5 different sounds. That's a lot to ask of a brain that struggles with rote-based memory. The second pillar of dyslexia is that it is a language-based difference. I guess the best way I could explain that is that a dyslexic student is perhaps a little tone deaf for language. This doesn't mean that they're not hearing you or they have a hearing problem or that they can't understand language. But subtle details can be harder to process or hold on to. For example, I had a student come in and I said, okay, well, this is due on Tuesday. And on Tuesday came around and she came in and I said, well, what do you have for me? And she says, oh, I thought we were doing this on Tuesday. Clearly this was not defiance. It was a mistake. She misunderstood. They're a little tone deaf to language. They hear the words, they understand a lot of it, but somewhere between the language processing and the memory, things can kind of get lost in translation and the message didn't fully stick. This can show up in school in a variety of ways. As students get older, these differences can become more noticeable, particularly as they get into middle school where they have multiple teachers, and high school as well. So, for example, let's say that they're at the end of class and they're being given a quick verbal instruction about homework. If the teacher's giving directions while everybody is packing up, pushing on their chairs, there's a lot of background noise going on, and the student may miss very important information, not intentionally, they may have been even trying to listen, but somehow they lost that instruction. We can even see this pattern when giving instructions even at home. For example, you give 3 instructions. The first one they understood and they remembered, that one's taken care of. The second one, maybe they're not 100% sure what was wanted. And the third one, maybe they didn't understand and they forgot. This isn't defiance in this child. And you can imagine if this was misunderstood or not known, there could be a lot of fights in the home over this. This isn't a lack of effort from the child. It's how the brain is processing language and memory together, which is why understanding them is very, very important. A lot of families ask me about evaluations and when to start. And you may wonder if they're necessary at all, which is a fair question. Susan Barton has two ways of looking at that issue, and this is a very common question. So Barton recognizes there's two valid paths, and both can be appropriate depending upon the family and the situation. One option is certainly to pursue a formal evaluation. This can be especially helpful if dyslexia is new to your family, if you suspect that there may be more than dyslexia going on, or if you're in a school that needs documentation to get very necessary accommodations for your child. In certain school settings, evaluations can be very, very important. The second option is also completely valid. Let's say that you're in a family and you know that dyslexia is in your family tree, and what you're seeing clearly is fitting the dyslexic profile. Many families choose not to delay intervention over the evaluations. Sometimes I say gently, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it is probably a duck. In that case, especially if there's multiple family members, you may not need to get an evaluation, particularly if the school is accommodating without that type of documentation. One thing to know, and I think is often missed, is that early intervention does matter. Support during kindergarten through second grade can be especially impactful. And that's a little bit hard to hear because dyslexia often is not really showing until third. That's when people start catching on. This doesn't mean older students miss the window and can't make progress. They absolutely can. But starting earlier has clear benefits. One of them is reducing frustration and preventing years of unnecessary struggle. Instead of viewing themselves as stupid, children with early intervention don't view themselves that way since they didn't experience years of being behind. There is also something to be said about neuroplasticity as well. Additionally, handwriting in particular cannot be improved beyond third grade very much. I'm not saying this to create pressure. It's simply meant to help families make informed choices based on what they're seeing right now. And certainly in my family, my son was older to be identified, and there was a difference between the two. The younger one was kindergarten. So let me reassure you, there is no single right path. Some families are going to evaluate first. Some are going to begin intervention right away. Some do both. The most important thing to know, though, is that if support is thoughtful, research-based, and responsive to the child in front of us, like Orton-Gillingham programs are, there can be a real change in how this student is reading. Understanding these pieces helps explain why dyslexia looks the way it does, and why the right kind of support makes a huge difference. The good news is that structured, research-based Orton-Gillingham programs do work. I can't say that enough. Programs like Barton and Wilson, some are called Orton-Gillingham itself, they reliably improve reading and spelling for dyslexic students or others that struggle to decode words. Progress is absolutely possible. And I look forward to talking with you if you need any more information. Thank you.